Before the dawn of antibiotics, infections were often death sentences. With the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, some fear that we could return to those scary times. Fortunately, at least a few organizations in the private and public sector are mobilizing to meet the challenge. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Greg Mario, CEO of TAXIS Pharmaceuticals, which researches and develops treatments to fight antibiotic-resistant infections. If you like this show, please subscribe and leave a review. Greg, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Thanks so much, David. Pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk about TAXIS, but first we're going to talk about how you got there and winding it back to the start and ask about, what was your childhood like? Any particular childhood influences that have stuck with you?
Yeah, well, we moved around a lot, following my dad on his career path in the pharmaceutical industry. But I think the key influencers, obviously, my mother and father. We came from pretty much nothing, and he worked his way up, and he taught us about work ethic and being true and honest. Very important. His parents, his mom and dad, his mother came from Holland. She emigrated in 1910, I guess, and his father came from Asti, Italy. And interestingly, just as an aside, his name was Lidio Amerio. Doesn't that sound beautiful, David?
Yeah, very nice.
Lidio Amerio. But no, they changed his name at Ellis Island to Jerry Mario. That's why I have two first names.
Nice.
And also church. They were very religious, and we went to church 3 times a week, twice on Sunday, because that was supposed to be the holy day where family, that part of your life would be really focused on. And then on Wednesdays, we'd go for a short service and choir practice. And I loved singing in the choir. And I must say that I'm not a real religious guy. I believe in God. We're not going to get into that topic, right?
Yeah.
But it was so important to me because I was a bit of a troubled child. I had a lot of skills and abilities that I didn't know how to handle and hone. And throughout my life, I've learned how to turn them to positive drivers. And that's why I'm here. That's why TAXIS is here.
That sounds very good. Speaking of names and name changes, of course, that's, I think, a common part of the American experience. I had a guest recently, the CEO of Fibrobiologics, and his name is Pete O'Heeron, O''Heeron, which I'm trying to figure out, where is that from? And he said he met somebody, I don't know if it was immigration, but it was actually originally a Hearn from Ireland, and someone heard it completely differently, and they spelled
wrote
it like
down
that,
differently, and they didn't even know how to write.
He's still using it, so they threw that apostrophe in. So anyway, all right. So you grew up, and then you did go to college, so you're in business school, so you're conventional enough by you got to that point. I think you went to Trinity, studied biochemistry. What was that all about?
Yeah, that's right. So I actually in high school, I never really cared much except for sports.
Yeah.
And girls. Okay, just to be honest. But I had a professor of physics that really captured me, and I fell in love with mechanical engineering, and I had a chemistry class, and I was good at the hard sciences and math. And so I went to Trinity, and I was thinking about being a mechanical engineer, and I didn't like the professors. I was hanging out second semester freshman year, and Dr. Henry DePhillips, who was the chair of the Department of Chemistry, I took a class with him first semester. He saw me on the quad, beautiful sunny spring day, second semester, and he came up to me and said, "Greg, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Dr. DePhillips, I am playing Frisbee. And later I'm going to play hacky sack," because that's basically what I was majoring and minoring in at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. I was like, I had a plan. It was gone. Physics was out. And he comes up to me and says, "No, what are you doing?" And I said, "I don't really know." He said, "Okay, here's what you're going to do." He's left-handed, super high energy guy. He puts his left finger into my chest And he says, Greg, who's your advisor? I said, I don't know. He said, okay, from henceforth, I'm your advisor and you will be a chemistry major.
Nice.
And it was almost like that Jennifer Aniston Office Space moment with the Kung Fu, if anyone knows that.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. And if it wasn't for Henry, I don't think I'd be here right now. I love him, and he pulled me into chemistry, and so biochem. And then I was pre-med. I wanted to be a doctor. I was very interested in life sciences. I want to make an impact and use my skills to do something that improves the human condition. That just was in my veins. And I didn't want to go right to med school. I wanted to get a job, so I sold drugs.
Yeah.
Not the kind you want, the kind you need. I
Mm-hmm.
worked for Burroughs Wellcome, and I was very good at it. But I saw that managed care was really coming in. This is like 1990. I'm sorry, 1988,
Yeah.
89. And physician autonomy was being lost. And I didn't want to work for some pencil pushing, finance person or accountant. So I went to business school. I went to Fuqua.
Nice.
And at Fuqua, I was motivated by fear because I always skated by. I have enough God given skills, decent amount of intellect that I can figure a few things out and put the minimum amount of effort in and get a B. That's all I was going for, just B. And I got to Fuqua and I was like, oh my gosh, these are some of the brightest people on the planet. And I was afraid. And fear can be a great motivator for short periods of time. It'll wear you down if it's too
Yeah.
long, but it got me focused. And, I graduated top 10. And I'm very proud of it. But like my dad had told me once, he said, you're only as good as your last performance. If anyone says to you, do you know who I am?
Yeah.
I immediately think, no, and
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
And then the Janet Jackson song kicks in. Doot, doot, what have you done for me lately? And that's the way I lead my life.
Yeah.
I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I'm, confident, not cocky. But what's next?
Yeah.
And taxes is what's next. That's what I'm doing. That's what I've dedicated my life to over the last 12 years.
Sounds good. Well, your description of Trinity sounds about what I remember. I was down the road in Middletown while you were up there, and
No
I think
way.
and they called it. I think Camp Trin Trin was the
Oh,
sort of the
yes,
nickname for it at the time.
exactly.
So you,
By the way, I climbed that chapel probably 100
yeah,
times.
interesting.
I'm a bit of a risk taker.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So before TAXIS, I saw a couple of things on your resume: MFP and Evogen. What were those?
Yeah, so before taxes, I mean, this goes back to 2004.
Yeah,
I was in pharma, a bunch of different companies. MFP has been around for a long time, and that's Mario Family Partners. That is a fund that
yeah,
my two brothers and I and my dad put together, and it's primarily for life sciences targeted early stage investments. Very high risk, portfolio approach, but all you need is one winner, and it can be a big winner.
yeah,
And so we've been doing that for a long time. That's MFP. Evogen is something separate. I picked up on it to help a friend who was running a business that had some cash flow. It was a threat detection system for bio and chemical agents. They had a contract with the U.S. Post Office, spinning off about 2.5 million of cash each year, and they weren't going anywhere with it. And he asked me to get involved. I ended up joining the board, becoming chairman of the board. I fired everyone in the C-suite because they were just no good. And there's a lot of depth to that discussion, but let's not name any names.
sure,
It's fine. But I took care of what had to be taken care of. And then I hired a guy, and he came in and he put us back, out of the ICU and stabilized the patient. And then I said, okay, we have a choice. We can either milk the 2.5 million a year, which no one's going to get excited about, or
yeah,
we can reinvest it. Let's go into central nervous system disease, because that's the Wild West right now. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, dementia. It doesn't matter if you live to you're 90, if at 80 you don't remember who you are, right?
right,
So that's where the action is in pharma. And I said, we should go there. And we took our technology and applied it to some technology at UPenn, and CogBio was born. And it's the first ever blood-based epilepsy diagnostic test. Right now, it's just suction cups on your head,
Right.
much like you do with the EKG. They do it on your head for an EEG without getting too deep.
Yeah.
It's very disturbing, and the only way they can get a definitive diagnosis is if you're actively seizing. And guess what? By the time you get to the emergency
Yeah.
room,
Usually
it's
not.
it's over.
Yeah.
So now we have something we can take a blood sample. It has to be within about 48 hours of your seizure, and it's very interesting. It's an algorithmic. This is artificial intelligence at its
Hmm.
best, where you're looking at an array of proteins that are associated with inflammatory neurologic conditions, and it works. And we're just trying to get to statistical significance. We've got a couple of studies set up. I think we're going to make an impact. And my philosophy, just to make it clear, 20,000 foot, make an impact, positive impact, thereby create value. Then you get return on investment. Right? I want to use my God-given skills and talents to do something that on the day I take my last breath, I can look back and say I accomplished
Yeah.
something of significant. I don't need my name on the building like my dad's is at
Yeah.
Rutgers. I don't need that. But you know what I mean? It's just like I take risks that other people think is probably illogical, but I can't help it. I'm swinging for the fences, and TAXIS is there, and we're going to make it happen, and it's going to be huge.
Oh, that sounds good. Well, the when you're talking about epilepsy and the EEG, one of the few advantages of being a bald guy is that it's easier to get the EEG reading.
No, it's true because they have
Yeah.
to shave your head a little
Yeah,
bit. They
exactly.
take
It's like
little.
that's traumatic for people, but
Oh,
not for
you're
me.
too funny.
That's
I
just
didn't think of that, David. That's
Yeah,
too funny.
that's just daily maintenance for me. So luckily, I don't have any seizures, though, at least at this point. All right, so let's talk about taxes. So at the outset of that, how would you think about the issue of antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria? Like, what is the issue? What does that mean?
Well, before penicillin, that was the number one cause of death, infections, and it was from bacteria. Our average life expectancy was 45 to 50, right? And with good antimicrobial control, the wonders of modern medicine were found and advanced. And now our average life expectancy is about 80 something. Um, when penicillin was introduced, we got the ball rolling. And there was a lot of activity and a lot of new drugs. But the thing about bacteria is that they were here before us, they'll be here after us. They're incredibly resilient creatures, and they can live in volcanoes. They can live in anaerobic, no oxygen
Yeah,
environments. They are tough, and the reason they're so tough is they mutate. So when they're attacked by something like an antibiotic, they freak out and they start almost a cancerous process, and they mutate. And most of the mutations kill the cells, but one mutation allows them to be viable in the environment of threat with the antibiotic. And then the antibiotic doesn't work anymore, so you need another one, then you need another one, and we're always going to need new ones
yeah,
because they evolve, and we're running out of them, and in some cases entirely, like super gonorrhea, which it's called. There's only one drug that still works, and it's at very high doses. It's almost outside of its therapeutic window. It's almost like watching baseball, which is back in season, where they show you the rectangle where that's
yeah.
a strike zone, and you got to get in that strike zone. And if you're outside of it, you're outside. So if you go to too high a dose, toxicity, put it on the shelf, it's over. Super gonorrhea is almost untreatable. Pseudomonas and hospital acquired and ventilator associated pneumonia is a 50-50 chance of survival. We got to change the game, and that's what we're doing at TAXIS.
So it sounds like there's a couple of anecdotes that maybe start to paint the big picture. And we've been hearing about these things for a while. Are we hitting a crisis point? I mean, if I come back next year, is it going to have a bunch more examples? Does it start to hit sort of like the mainstream? Yeah, I have cellulitis or something, and the antibiotics are just not going to work. How is it going to come upon us if we're not successful in dealing with it?
Yeah, I think if we use COVID, a virus, as an example. So COVID and viruses are like Santa Ana winds.
Yeah,
They rise up, burn, and they go away. Bacteria are insidious. They creep up and they keep creeping up. So in a year from now, might not be a whole lot different. It'll be worse,
yeah,
brick by brick. But projections have it that by 2050, if we don't make a game changing move here, tens of millions of people will die every year. It'll make COVID look like a walk in the park. It's COVID times 100,
yeah.
perhaps 1,000. But it's sneaking up on us, and it's been doing that for a while. And you can see all the literature that shows the projections of death. We have to do something about it. We have some time, and that's why we've been working on this for 12 years,
Yeah.
and we're getting close to the finish line, and it's going to change the game, and it's going to help us win because we can't live without bacteria, the biome. We can't digest our food, right?
Hmm.
But we can't live with them when we're immunocompromised. It goes from symbiotic to parasitic very quickly,
Yeah.
to balance. The whole idea with bacteria, it's a balance. We live with them, or we can't live without them. So, to answer your question, within a year, it's not going to be much different. Within 5,
Yeah.
very much. Within 10, big time. That's the wave that's coming.
So you say you've been working on this for some time now. So what are you trying to do in this space? What's Taxis doing here?
So, unlike a lot of historical antimicrobial development efforts, we're not really developing antibiotics. We're developing anti-resistance solutions. So, there hasn't been a transformational change in the technology since the early 80s. Two things. One, the beta lactamase inhibitors. And everyone has gotten amoxicillin for an ear infection when they
Yeah.
were kids, right? And your kids probably got them. And then, for 40 years it worked and it stopped working. And then researchers at GSK determined that there was an enzyme that these bugs were producing called beta lactamase. And the first beta lactamase inhibitor was released in the 80s, and that was clavulanic acid, not a household name, but when combined with amoxicillin, voila, Augmentin was born.
Yeah.
Same exact drug that didn't work, but knock out a resistance mechanism and it works. So it's like, someone comes to cut your lawn, trim your tree. It's going to grow back. They got to come back. And you have these incremental innovations over the last 40 years that are meaningful.
Hmm.
The third, fourth, fifth generation, fill in the blank, monobactam, cephalosporin, tetracycline, et cetera. But it's not the root cause. We at Taxis, we're trying to rip it out from the root. I don't want the landscaper to come back. The problem is gone,
Yeah.
and that's what we're doing. That's what we're focused on.
Now, you recently got a grant in this space, and I want to ask you a little bit about that. The way you've described antibiotic resistance, it's definitely a public health threat. And so it's not shocking that you would have some organizations, maybe both on the public side and private side, that would be seeking to address that with some dollars. Who is providing grant funding on this topic?
Well, so the primary sources of grant funding, at least non-dilutive, it's coming from the National Institutes of Health,
Yeah.
right? NIH. And in this case, we got a grant from the NIAID, National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And they're very focused on certain disease areas, and they have different ones, that come and go. And it's a great source of funding, but it's very competitive, very difficult. The private side is different. Private is about pure profit, return on investment, which is fine. We're in a capitalist society,
Hmm.
and they expect that they're going to get equity or they're going to get, some value and upside. The public funding sources, all they care about is, are you viable and you're
Yeah.
not going to go out of business? And if so, we'll give you money because we believe in your science, technology, and your team. And it's been proven for TAXIS that CARBEX, which is a quasi-public-private fund, a bunch of big government agencies, German, U.S., British, and also high net worth individuals like the Gates Foundation and others, because they see the writing on the wall, and this is a big problem. So they started a fund. We got funded for a very interesting combination therapy that I think is a knockout, and we hit all of our milestones, but they'd run out of money. So then we shifted gears, didn't wait for them, and we went to the NIH. So we're actually getting the same project funded for a second time, just moving it toward the clinic. And after this NIH grant of 2.7 million, we'll have our first efflux pump inhibitor in the clinic.
And so, what are the requirements that you have to hit in order to, to fulfill the requirements under this grant?
Well, it's basically a small business plan, right? So, in science, there's a hypothesis. This is what we think. There's a plan. Here's how we're going to approach it. There's a project timeline. There's a budget. That's pretty much what it is. And if they think that, first of all, the objective is something that's meaningful to us, okay, next step. And then let's talk about your team and your people capabilities. Okay, next step. Then let's talk about how are you going to do it, and how much time is it going to take, and how many resources, and how much money. So it really is like building a mini business plan. It's very rigorous. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And early in the days of this company, we went after a bunch of grants that I had a good feeling we wouldn't get because we didn't have everything. But it was a great way to organize the team of scientists. Okay, here's what we're doing. Here are the objectives. Let's get focused. We're not academicians just looking for a publication. It's important to have a publication, publish or perish, but that's not the objective. The end game is get a drug on the market. So it's a great exercise, but boy, it takes a long time. I got to tell you. And it's a very competitive space. So you have to have something that catches their attention, they believe is relevant, high-end unmet need, and they believe in you, your science, your technology, your team, that you can get it done. And they believe in us now. We've been recognized, and that's something that's a feather in our caps, and I'm very proud of.
So I like the idea, and you mentioned the term before, non-dilutive funding. So you don't have to give up a share of the company in order to get the grant.
That's correct.
What's it like in practice? Is it better than having an investment? Is it just different?
Well, on the one hand, it's certainly better for our investors, right? As a fiduciary, I'm trying to max out the return on their invested dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't take anything. It's like free money, but it's not really free.
No.
Because you have new people who are going to be looking over your shoulder, and you have to respond and report to them. But you know what? As long as you're executing on the plan that they approved, they're cool. And the data drives the bus. We can't force it to work. I can't guarantee that we're going to win, but I can guarantee that we're going to figure it out, and we're not going to have a false negative, right? That's the critical. False positive, you figure them out after a while. False negative is like missing the bus.
Yeah.
Right.
So you come across something that could have worked, and you leave it behind.
And you miss it.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that makes me a little afraid. Everything else I got under control, but that,
So you mentioned you've been at it for a dozen years or so. How has the company? That's not that long, right? How has the company evolved since you started it? I mean, was the vision very much to be where you are today?
No, totally different. Life, business, it's an iterative process, and especially in science. Aristotle had some theories; they were all wrong, right? But it builds on itself. So we started out headed in one direction, and it just didn't look like it was working. And after about 2 years into it, I was ready to wind the company up, and I was really kind of down. I had so much energy and I was so excited, and my scientific founders were excited, and the stuff we were working on just wasn't working, and I
Yeah.
was ready to. I had to kill it, and then hallelujah, our chief scientific officer, Dr. Ajit Parhi, who's the engine of our science and our team, he came up with this idea. He said, I see something that's hitting the same target we're working on that looks interesting. I have an idea. And it just turns out it was a formulation play, a solubility play. And that's the drug that is now an oral anti-MRSA drug candidate that's gone through the first step of phase 1 with healthy volunteers, no serious adverse events, no dose limiting toxicities. And we're pushing that through the clinic. And it's a very important drug. Oral bioavailability is critical. Most of these drugs are based on plants and they're big, so they have to be IV. Anyhow, so I was ready to shut it down. Keep your eyes open, stay on your toes. Don't get wedded to anything, but don't get down. The
Yeah.
data drives the bus, and if the data is good, we push forward. I operate by the null hypothesis. In my life, I'm optimistic. In drug development, I'm very pessimistic. Most things fail. So the null hypothesis from a scientist's perspective is this isn't going to work. Prove me wrong. I
Yeah.
want to push it as fast as I can to a critical milestone. And if it's not working, cut it off, jettison, move on. And we've pivoted and moved, and now we have a portfolio of drug candidates that are all novel and cutting edge technology that hit 6 of the CDC's top 10 deadliest bacterial pathogens. So we're going after a big net. It's portfolio.
Sounds great. My final question for you, Greg, has to do with reading, and if you have any opportunity to read any books, and if so, if you anything you'd recommend or recommend that we avoid.
Well, I don't have as much time to read as I will when we're done saving the world, but I've always been into spy novels and sci-fi. So I just reread Asimov's Foundation series,
Yep.
which I love. I mean, this is a guy in the 50s, used to get on a train, and they had phone booths on trains,
Yeah.
and he would sit in the phone booth and he would spend the whole day. He'd go round trip or maybe twice. Very strange man, but incredible. And some of my favorite authors: Ken Follett, spy novels, Key to Rebecca, Eye of the Needle. His best work, though, was something in a totally different genre. He wrote Pillars of the Earth, which you might have seen on TV. It was one of my favorite books I've ever read, and I sent it to every person I knew back when it came out. Robert Ludlum, the Bourne series, we see the movies, right? But that guy had a vocabulary like William Safire. It was brutal, and I had to read his books with a dictionary and a thesaurus next to me,
Yeah.
but it taught me the English language. And of course, Stephen King. Enough said.
Sounds good. Well, that's it for yet another episode of the HealthBiz podcast. I've been speaking today with Greg Mario, CEO of TAXIS Pharmaceuticals. We've been talking about drugs to fight antibiotic-resistant infections. Greg, thanks so much for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast. You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.